Lincoln had a company of other Whig congressmen who were also Zachary Taylor supporters, known as the Young Indians. The convention was held June 7th through 10th at the Philadelphia Museum building at 9th and Sansom Streets, also known as the Chinese Museum. Built in 1838, it was reputed to have been the second largest hall in the Western world, with a capacity of 15,000 people, exceeded only by Westminster Abbey in London. Lincoln was elected to Congress as a supporter of Henry Clay, the only Whig from his state. He was given the nickname of the Lone Star of Illinois. As the convention drew near, Lincoln realized that it was not possible to elect Clay to the presidency. And Lincoln was nothing if not a pragmatic politician. The Illinoisan gradually became an active supporter of Louisiana plantation owner Zachary Taylor. After the nomination was won by Taylor, Lincoln left Philadelphia in the company of friends on Saturday, June the 10th of 1848, bound for a campaign rally in Wilmington, Delaware, and then back to Washington, D.C. On February 18th of 1861, while Lincoln traveled across New York State on his way to Albany, Jefferson Davis was sworn in as the first president of the Confederacy. So Abraham Lincoln is not even the president yet, and already the Confederacy has its president. On Thursday, February the 21st, Lincoln arrived in Philadelphia at the Kensington Depot of the Philadelphia and Trenton Railroad, Front and Burke Streets, at 3:45 p.m. Nearly 100,000 people. And this is a city of a population of 565,000. That's pretty good. So, nearly 100,000 people turned out on that cold February day to welcome their newly elected leader as he rode 3 miles in an open barouche from the rail depot to the Continental Hotel on the southeast corner of 9th and Chestnut Streets, only 3 blocks west of the State House. The Continental Hotel was one of the finest hotels in the United States. Opened 1 year earlier, done in the Italianate style, and designed by future League member John MacArthur Jr., it could house over 1,000 guests in its 700 rooms. It boasted an elevator, a freestanding stairway from the lobby to the second floor, and a 165-foot second-floor promenade that opened to a second-floor balcony. Lobby, shops, private rooms, and dining rooms occupied the first 2 floors. It was the obvious place for the president-elect to stay. Immediately after his arrival at the hotel, Lincoln was met by Alexander Henry, the mayor of Philadelphia, and both appeared on the hotel balcony to address the crowd that filled the street below. The mayor officially welcomed the president-elect to the city. Lincoln spoke of Independence Hall and the Declaration of Independence. He said, "I shall do nothing inconsistent with the teachings of that holy and most sacred walls. All my political warfare has been in favor of teachings coming forth from that sacred hall. May my right hand forget its cunning, and my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, if ever I prove false to those teachings." The next morning, on Washington's birthday, February the 22nd of 1861, Lincoln and his 7-year-old son, Tad, mounted an open carriage and rode 3 blocks to Independence Hall. Lincoln entered the assembly room of the State House for the first time. After welcoming remarks by the president of the Select Council, Lincoln was expected to address the waiting council members. His speech was extemporaneous. His voice was low and barely audible. "I am filled with deep emotion at finding myself standing here in this place, where were collected together the wisdom, the patriotism, the devotion to principle, from which sprang the institutions under which we live. All the political sentiments I entertain have been drawn from the sentiments which originated and were given to the world from this hall in which we stand. I have never had a feeling politically that did not spring from the sentiments embodied in the Declaration of Independence." And he would close with these words, "If this country cannot be saved without giving up that principle of liberty, I was about to say I would rather be assassinated on this spot than to surrender it. My friends, this is a wholly unprepared speech. I did not expect to be called upon to say a word when I came here. I supposed I was merely to do something towards raising a flag. I may therefore have said something indiscreet, but I have said nothing but what I am willing to live by and, in the pleasure of Almighty God, die by." Kind of makes you wonder what he was thinking. And he's not even in Washington, D.C. yet. The president-elect and his son walked out of Independence Hall through the Chestnut Street door onto the overcast day. They ascended a 6-foot-high wooden platform and faced the dense crowd. Lincoln stood in his overcoat, bareheaded, holding his top hat in his good left hand, while Tad fidgeted on the edge of the platform to his left. Lincoln briefly addressed the crowd. According to eyewitness U.S. Army Private Henry J. Snyder, quote, "A great bundle containing the flag was at hand, and lifted with ready hands, and on the word go, the president drew the bundle up the staff. At the proper moment, the cord that held the bundle was broken. The flag was blown out by the wind to the joy, happiness, and plaudits of the thousands of people attesting their feelings." According to Snyder, the flag was made by sailors from the frigate USS Hartford on its homeward journey from China and presented to the city as port of payment. Later that day, at the state capitol building in Harrisburg, Lincoln told the Pennsylvania General Assembly that the success of the flag waving ceremony that morning in Philadelphia augured well for the Union. He said, "When, according to the arrangements, the cord was pulled and it flaunted gloriously to the wind without an accident, in the bright flowing sunshine of the morning, I could not help hoping that there was in the entire success of that beautiful ceremony at least something of an omen of what is to come." Interesting, isn't it? Washington, D.C., December 30th, 1862. My dear Mr. President, the bearer, Mr. E.D. Marchant, the eminent artist, has been empowered by a large body of your personal and political friends to paint your picture for the Hall of American Independence. A generous subscription is made, and he visits you to ask your acquiescence and to exhibit his testimonials. He will need little of your time. There is no likeness of you at Independence Hall. It should be there, and as Mr. Marchant is a most distinguished artist and is commended by the most powerful influences, I trust you will give him a favorable reception. Yours truly, J.W. Forney. And as we will see, Lincoln agreed. Marchant's studio was actually in the White House, where he worked on the portrait over several months and was, quote, "in daily communication with the remarkable man whose features I sought to portray." Marchant characterized his experience as more truly a labor of love than I am often permitted to perform. Writing sometime later to artist Daniel Huntington, Marchant wrote of Lincoln, quote, "He was seldom twice alike, hence the endless variety observable photographs we have of him. Though indelibly impressed upon my mind during a residence of 4 months at the White House, they are the most difficult to describe that I ever knew." Lincoln was the most difficult subject who ever taxed the skills of an artist. Sometime during the late summer of 1863, the painting was hung in the council chamber in Independence Hall. It was originally thought to have hung there until 1866, but in 1864, a caption on an engraving of the portrait by Philadelphian John Certain indicated that the painting was, quote, "in the possession of the Union League of Philadelphia." And after all, it was they who commissioned it. 1864. The United States Sanitary Commission was an official agency of the United States government created by legislation signed by Abraham Lincoln on June the 18th, 1861, to coordinate the volunteer efforts of women who wanted to contribute to the war effort of the Union during the Civil War itself. Organized and operated by volunteers, they raised money, eventually $25 million, collected donations, worked as nurses, ran kitchens in the army camps, administered hospital ships, made uniforms, and organized sanitary fairs to support the Federal Army with funds and supplies. It was by far the most beneficent of the many civilian organizations formed for the help of soldiers during the Civil War. In Philadelphia, the local branch of the Sanitary Commission was located at 1307 Chestnut Streets. The executive committee of this branch was composed of Horace Binney, Jr., chairman, and 13 others, all but 2 of whom were actually members of the Union League. Horace Binney would become the League's 3rd president in 1869. In aid of the Sanitary Commission, fairs were held in the major Union cities. The Great Central Fair in Philadelphia opened June the 7th and closed June 28th of 1864. It occupied the entire space of Logan Square. The buildings constructed in 40 working days included the main building of the fair, which extended through the center of the square from 18th to 19th Streets and was of Gothic arch design, 549 feet long, 60 feet wide, and was, I think, close to 95 feet in height. Single-floor buildings extended around the 4 sides of the square, connected by corridors with a central feature called Union Avenue. The Great Fair succeeded in raising over $1 million for the Sanitary Commission. It was the second most successful, only beat out by the fair in Manhattan by like maybe $10,000. So Philadelphia did pretty good. The Lincolns visited the Philadelphia Fair on June the 16th. They arrived by train at the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore Railroad Depot at Broad and Prime Streets. And everybody knows where Prime was? It still is. It's just not called Prime. Washington, right. It's today's Washington Avenue. So Different building. That's a different head house. So that was built for the centennial. The one where Lincoln arrived was torn down to build the new one. So, but same location. Yeah. So, all right. Their carriage traveled north on Broad Street, turning right onto Chestnut Street, passing the League House on its way to the slide. I'm sorry, I'm reading. There is no slide to give. On its way to the Continental Hotel at 9th Street. According to a newspaper report, the Union League House was beautifully decorated. The stars and stripes were hung gracefully across the building, beneath the windows of every story, while both the state and national colors were displayed from the windows. From the flagstaff floated white streamers, each containing the name of a state. The windows of the house were occupied by ladies who waved their handkerchiefs enthusiastically, and upon the steps were many members of the League who cheered lustily. I've always wondered why the journalist chose that adjective to describe the League members that day as waving lustily and while their women were inside the house, but we'll never know that one anyway. So, be that as it may. So, Sidney George Fisher was a Philadelphia gentleman, lawyer, farmer, plantation owner, political essayist, and occasional poet. A rabid anti-Democrat, Fisher was a de facto Whig. He lent his support to candidates who opposed the Jacksonian Democrats in national elections and remained an ardent anti-Democrat his entire life. Fisher was also a slavery apologist. He agreed with abolitionists that slavery was evil, but argued that it was necessary and served as a form of welfare for a race that would otherwise be a burden on the federal government and the civic institutions of society. He was, however, the greatest diarist in 19th century Philadelphia. Fisher was invited by Morton McMichael to join League members in a visit to Lincoln at the Continental Hotel. And this is what Fisher had to say. I had all that I wanted, an opportunity to see and observe the man. Was much pleased by his countenance, voice, and manner. He is tall, slender, not awkward and uncouth as has been represented, well dressed in black, self-possessed, and easy, frank, and cordial. The pictures of him do great injustice to his face. His features are irregular and would be coarse but for their expression, which is genial, animated, and kind. He looked somewhat pale and languid, and there was a soft shade of melancholy in his smile and in his eyes. Altogether an honest, intelligent, amiable countenance, calculated to inspire respect, confidence, and regard. His voice, too, is clear and manly. I'm very glad I have seen him. His whole bearing and aspect confirmed the opinion I had formed of him. The Lincolns arrived at the fair at approximately 4:30 p.m. on June the 16th. The president spent about an hour in making the tour of the fair, accompanied by Secretary of State William Seward and his personal secretary, Jonathan Nicolay. They visited the fair's publication booth, where signed copies of the Emancipation Proclamation were sold for $10 each. After much jostling among the crowd, the Lincolns were brought to a collection room, where a well-prepared luncheon table was arranged. A reporter was not near enough to catch the president's first words upon entering the banquet hall, but is informed that he whispered to a companion on his left, "This is a right smart get out." Ever the down-to-earth man was Abraham Lincoln. The president was afterward invited to a reception at the League in his honor. According to an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer of June 17th, a League delegation had been appointed to escort him from the fairgrounds to the League House, but as the president disliked escorts, he came down one street while the delegation went up the other. Arriving unexpectedly, Lincoln was greeted by Daniel Dougherty. Mr. Dougherty spoke for a number of minutes in his usual eloquence, while Lincoln, standing 6 feet 4 inches in height, listening attentively, unmoved, and as calm as a lighthouse, enduring the storm of the words. When Dougherty finished, Mr. Lincoln said, well, Mr. Dougherty, I presume the gentleman present will expect me to make some response to the very eloquent address with which you have honored me, but in the position I hold as President of the United States and candidate for re-election to that high office, I think it more becoming that I should not address any political assemblages. Dougherty replied, no, Mr. President, beg pardon, Mr. President. This is not a political assemblage, it is simply a loyal one. Then President Lincoln told the members, I thank you, sir, for your kind words of welcome. I am happy at the opportunity of visiting the Union League of Philadelphia, the first, I believe, of the Union Leagues, an organization free from political prejudices and prompted in its information by motives of the highest patriotism. I have many a time heard of its doing great good, and no one has charged it with doing any wrong. But it is not my intention to make a speech. My object in visiting Philadelphia was exclusively to witness the sanitary fair, and I need scarcely say that I have been more than delighted in witnessing the extraordinary efforts of your patriotic men and lovely ladies in behalf of the suffering soldiers and sailors of our country. It will now afford me pleasure to take each of you by the hand. By the way, Lincoln's hand was proverbially, his right hand was usually swollen all the time because he shook so many hands. So, 1865. On Good Friday, April 14th, at approximately 10:05 p.m., Abraham Lincoln was mortally shot at Ford's Theater. He would die the next morning. The Union and its citizens mourned. Lincoln was to be buried in his hometown of Springfield, Illinois. The train carrying his body and that of his son Willie, who had died in 1862 and was to be buried with his father in the Springfield Cemetery, would traverse across the northern states in a trip of over 2 weeks. Starting in Washington, D.C., it would make stops in Baltimore and Harrisburg before reaching Philadelphia on April 22nd, where the train arrived at, again, the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore depot at Broad and Prime Streets at 4:50 p.m. The Union League, due to its preeminent position in Philadelphia, was given the honor of receiving the body at Independence Square. The casket was placed on the funeral car built for the occasion by E.A. Early undertakers from 10th and Green Streets. To allow the expected thousands of people who wished to view the funeral procession a chance to see the hearse and its coffin, a relatively long and circuitous route was designed to reach Independence Hall, where Lincoln's body would lie in state for 2 nights. At 6 p.m., the procession traveled north on Broad Street, turning west on Walnut, north again on 21st, east on Arch, south on 3rd, and then west on Walnut Street, arriving at the south gate to Independence Square. The square was illuminated with 60 calcium lights, some red, some white, and some blue. Members of the Union League, dressed in black morning suits, white gloves, and mourning ribbons in their lapels, formed a double line along both sides of the pathway leading from the gate to the south door of Independence Hall. When the hearse arrived at 8 p.m., the coffin was carried between the lines of the bareheaded but sorrowful League members. League member Thomas Stewartson, Jr., on the committee to receive the body of the president, wrote in his diary, Sunday, April 23rd, the Union League was appointed to receive the body of our good president last evening in Independence Square. As a member of the League, I was in a manner obliged to look upon the face of the honored dead. I say obliged because I should not otherwise have made any effort to do so, my impressions of the man being so pleasant that I feared to disturb my memory with any possible disappointment. But it turned out well. Homely in feature he was, as all the world knows, but a better face and a face which more clearly told of a good man I never looked upon, even as it lay there lifeless. Gentle and tender, honest, open, and pure. I feel, as nearly every man, woman, and child does feel, a personal and warm love for the man as well as an exalted respect for the ruler. He is now lying in Independence Hall, near the famous old bell with its motto, Made to Speak Again, proclaim liberty throughout the land and to all the inhabitants thereof. So that was Abraham Lincoln in Philadelphia. So actually, once the body left Philadelphia, actually, what happened? So in 1861, when Lincoln made his train trip from Springfield to Washington, D.C., it went Springfield, Michigan City, along the northeast corridor, like Indiana, into Ohio, Cleveland, then up to Buffalo, across New York State to Albany, Albany to New York City, New York to Newark, Newark to Trenton, Trenton to Philadelphia, Philadelphia to Baltimore, and then Baltimore down to Washington, D.C. So his funeral train simply reversed the order. So Washington, Baltimore, Harrisburg, Philadelphia, and then back up into New York, and then back over to Springfield, and that's what that was all about. So Jen, if we're ready, can we take it on? We're not going anywhere. Let's go. Okay. So the first slide, okay, 1848, next slide, okay, here, and this is what Abraham Lincoln looked like in 1847. He really was a very comely looking man, wasn't he? I mean, it reminds me there's this wonderful story when he and Douglas were having their debates in 1858, and Lincoln made a statement, and Douglas accused Lincoln of basically lying, and Lincoln turned around and said, "Mr. Douglas, if I had a second face, would I, like you look, you're so foul, evil looking type of thing, or I know you're speaking double faced out of your tongue." And Mr. Lincoln said, "Well, Mr. Douglas, if I had a second face, would I be wearing this one?" Type so to speak. So you know, uh, sorry, I screwed that one up. I haven't, it's been a while since I've given this talk, so I got to get my memory back anyway. But you can understand. So Lincoln very much knew how to live within his own body, and not a handsome man at all. All right. Next slide, please, Jen. So this is the Philadelphia Museum. This is, 9th and Sampson Streets, erected in 1838, also known as the Chinese Museum, because there was a Philadelphian named Nathan Dunn, Quaker turned Episcopalian, who owed a lot of creditors, a lot of money in Philadelphia by 1820. And the best way to pay them back was for him to go to China, which he did for 12 years. And when he came back from China, he not only had enough money to pay off all of his creditors, but he also had a collection that was unparalleled outside of China itself. Nobody else in Western Europe or in the Americas had anything like it. And so he had his museum basically on the second floor of this building. He would die in 18, oh geez, when did he die? Shucks, 1842. And at that point, his collection was sold. I think there's some portraits of it left in Philadelphia, but nonetheless, though, well, as you probably all know, February the 2nd, 1854, the Act of Consolidation was passed by the state legislature. And so they had a big party in the city. They had fireworks. And sure enough, the fireworks landed on the roof of the building and it was gone within a matter of hours, just burned right to the ground. But on the other hand, though, by burning down, it gave them space to build a Continental Hotel. On the other hand, because after all, that is where Abraham Lincoln got to stay twice, as a matter of fact. So from one disaster comes something else that turns out to be pretty good. And then today, of course, the Continental is long gone. And it was replaced by that Horace Trumbauer building that's now called the Franklin House, I believe it is. So anyway, 9th and Chestnut, yeah. Mm-hmm. Actually, it goes from 9th to 8th, Chestnut to Sansom. Okay, so, all right. So that's that one. All right. It doesn't look like it would hold 15,000 people, but next slide, please, Jen. And this is what it looked like inside. So it was pretty cavernous, as you can see. So must have been fun. So especially when Henry Clay came expecting to be the presidential nominee and Zachary Taylor walks away with it. So, but what was also interesting from that election in 1848 is that Taylor gets the nomination. He's dead within a matter of months. And Millard Fillmore becomes the president as the vice president. And in 1856, Millard Fillmore would run against Buchanan and Fremont as an American nativist or know-nothing candidate, of all things. So, and did very well in Philadelphia. So, but that's a different story for a different day, perhaps, that election itself. So anyway, next slide, please. So here we have Henry Clay sitting there reading the newspaper, the Tribune, and as you can see behind him, with their daggers drawn, are all of his political enemies. I guess is probably not too strong a word to say. And he doesn't even see them or hear them coming. And that's the way politics have always been, hasn't it? They sneak up on you in the night, and next thing you know, it's over with. So 1848, 2024, not a lot of difference, to be honest with you. So next slide, please, Jen. Now we're back in 1861. Slide, please. He's looking a little better. He's aging pretty well, actually, isn't he? I think he looks much better in this photograph than he did the one from 1847. So a little older, more mature, but still Abraham Lincoln, undeniably. So next slide, please, Jen. So here we are, off to the right. So Philadelphia and Trenton Railroad, and that's 8th and Burke Street. So that's where the train came in. See Pennsylvania Railroad here. Okay, that's basically 30th. Actually, it was across the river, loosely in the area where 30th Street Station is today. 33rd and Market is where they actually had their station. This is the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore coming up from the south, and that would go into the city itself to Broad and Prime. And so those were the three main railroads that came in and out of the city. So I still find it amazing that when Lincoln arrived on February the 21st, 100,000 people came to visit him. I mean, that is just amazing for that point in time. So, all right. Does that all make sense and how the rail lines all connect? Okay. Next slide, please, Jen. And that's the Continental Hotel. Again, if Philadelphia had an architect in the 19th century, mid-19th century, who knew how to build big buildings, kind of the way Trumbauer did in the 20th. It was John MacArthur, because after all, from this hotel, he did City Hall, for instance, another big building. He'd built some big churches as well. One had the tallest steeple in the city at one point, I think 10th Presbyterian. So that was the fanciest hotel in the city, if not the country itself. And so that's where Abraham Lincoln would stay twice. And again, 8th to 9th, Chestnut to Sansom. Okay, next slide, please, Jen. All right, nice woodcut from Independence Hall, or the Hall of Independence, as it was called in the 19th century. So it's a view I haven't seen very often. That's kind of why I like it. Next slide, please, Jen. And here we have Abraham Lincoln. So I'm going to move away from the mic and just point him out. And if you go to the State House today and you look on the pavement in front of the building on the Chestnut Street side, you'll see that bronze plaque embedded in the sidewalk that says Abraham Lincoln was here, basically. So next slide, please, Jen. We get into 1863. Another slide, please. Aha. So this is the portrait from life. And I have not been able to find more than 5 life portraits of Lincoln. He preferred to be photographed. And after Frederick Douglass, he was the most photographed man in the 19th century. Tons of Lincoln photographs. But it's nice to have a life portrait of him because it shows him in a very different light, in a different way. What was even more amazing, I thought, is that he and his family encouraged Marchand actually to live and work in the White House while the portrait was being painted from life. Has anybody been to the Union League and seen this painting by any chance? That's a shame, because it's a phenomenal painting. It's a wonderful portrait. This slide does not do it credit or justice at all. But let me explain the portrait. It's not just a relatively handsome portrait of Abraham. And actually, Lincoln liked it so much, he asked if he could keep it, but that wasn't going to happen. The League had other ideas for it, so that was bringing it back to Independence Hall. But one of the nice things about 19th century portraits and paintings in general is that they were full of symbolism. They didn't, all they had was paintings and pamphlets and newspapers to really express opinions and thoughts and ideas. And so an artist put his or her thoughts on canvas. And so here we have Abraham Lincoln sitting at a table, and under his left arm, you can see a white piece of paper. Now, this was started in February of 1863. What's that white piece of paper? Emancipation Proclamation that he signed on January the 1st. You can see the quill in his right hand and the inkwell just off of his left elbow. And then above Lincoln, over his left shoulder, in the upper right-hand corner, is a statue of the goddess of liberty. And you can see that the chains of slavery have been metaphorically broken because Abraham Lincoln signed that document on January the 1st. Behind Lincoln, over his right shoulder, you can see 2 columns there, obviously a reference to neoclassicism and neoclassical history. Judging by the carvings on the bases of the columns, they are both Greek and Roman. And what did the Greeks and Roman do? They gave us democracy. They gave us a democratic form of government, a republic. So and then it's a little hard to tell in this slide, but right in here, you can, I don't know if it shows up well from back there, but the sun is rising. There's a new day dawning in American history, metaphorically, because Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. So what's the interpretation of this? So Lincoln is no longer just the president or the commander-in-chief. He's now the great emancipator, because this is no longer a war of secession, rebellion, reunion. This is a war now to end slavery, and Lincoln is the great emancipator. So it's a whole new world. And this painting is giving that message to Philadelphians when they walk through Independence Hall. Keep in mind that Independence Hall was the heart of Philadelphia in the 19th century. I mean, politically, economically, socially, it was open 7 days a week. And everybody who walked through it was bound to see this portrait. So what better place to put a piece of visual propaganda than Independence Hall and things like this? So to me, it's out of the League's 300 plus paintings, it's my favorite painting, just because no other painting tells a story quite as good as this one. So make sense to everybody? Oh, the other thing too that's kind of fun is that Marchand painted Lincoln with a white tie. Lincoln normally wore those black thin bolero type ties. But here he's wearing a white tie that I think gives him a little bit more dignity. Yeah, it's not that red. It's just the way it came. Yeah, yeah. Sorry about that. Uh-huh. You know what? It's actually it's been a. Did any of you? We did a tour for APT. My God, 10 years ago. Anybody remember that? Nobody was. It was even. It was well before COVID. I think actually, to be honest, I thought. Yeah. Anyway. Hmm. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. We did the walk inside and saw this painting in Lincoln Hall. So, good question. They generally can't. Oh, sure. So how can the, you bet, got it. Sure. I'm sorry. I should have done it anyway. How can the public see this painting? And generally they can't unless you arrange for a tour of the lake, which would be a private tour. Except prior to COVID, for my gosh, probably 10 years at least, we had an open house on the Saturday closest to Lincoln's birthday. Ran 11 to 2, no reservation, no dress code, no charge. You just walked in the 15th Street door, you got put into a group of 20 people, and you took a 45, 50-minute tour around the first two floors of the house, and including a stop right in front of this portrait. And so that's how you got to do it. Now, unfortunately, I don't think the league has picked them up since COVID. And the problem, I think, is they don't have enough docents because the members, volunteers, docents. And even before COVID hit, they were kind of losing their docent core, if you will. So they had fewer and fewer people to do it. So I'm guessing they're not doing it this year. I know they're not doing it this year, and I'm guessing it's because they don't have enough bodies to do the tours. So, because the tours go through, the tour groups go out every 10 minutes, 20 minutes. So you need two members for each tour group every 10 minutes. So that means you need about 20 to 24 members to do it. So it's a big undertaking. So, but hopefully in the near future they'll do something like that again. Or we can always arrange to take APT tour guides there if you want. Okay. The lake looks a lot different since the last time you guys all saw it. Yes, Jen. So the
What room is the painting in the lake?
okay, the portrait is in Lincoln Hall. So second floor, center of the building. It's the main ballroom in the house itself. So, and the painting has only been out of the league's possession once in 1999 for an Abraham Lincoln exhibit at the Lincoln Museum in Springfield, Illinois. Otherwise, it's never left the building. It's been there all this time. So, all right, all right, Jen, next portrait or next slide, please. 1864. All right, Sanitary Commission. You can see all the different forms of charity that performed. And again, its mission basically, actually, besides just its charitable mission, it also had a medical mission. That was to to establish and maintain sanitary standards in Union Army camps and Navy ships. Because what the British learned in the mid 1850s during the Crimean War is that disease will kill more soldiers and sailors than bullets will at all. And the Army knew that, and they were trying to uh, change that ratio, if you will, but it didn't work. It actually, depending on, as they discover more and more records and whatnot, they think it might actually have been 3 to 1 during the Civil War itself. So they meant well, but they just couldn't quite pull it off, unfortunately. So next slide, please. So this is the Great Central Fair itself, designed by Samuel Neese, an architect. We don't hear much of him in Philadelphia, but he's buried out the Woodlands in West Philly. The cathedral of St. Peter and Paul had just opened up at the same time that June of 1864, so it was the most prominent building in that part of the city, to say the least. Okay, that was called Union Hall. That was the one that was almost 600 feet long, and it is an amazing piece of cast iron structure and Gothic in form. They covered a number of trees in there, bushes, because they did not want to tear or cut down any of the trees that were on Logan Square at that point in time. This was the horticultural, no, actually, yeah, that was the horticultural hall. There was actually a pond in the middle of that building with live fish in it. They had a band that played on that island in the middle of the pond 24 hours a day. You could take canoes out and rowboat out to it if you wanted to. Incredibly sophisticated affair. This was the art gallery that went across the entire north side. So that's race. Um, and they sold everything imaginable under the sun. And as I mentioned, geez, they in the 3 weeks they raised $1.1 million, and for a city that was the second biggest city in the country, not bad. Next slide, please. So and here's the floor plan. So race, vine. There's there's horticultural hall with its pond and its island and things like that. Art gallery across the top. Restaurant. I mean, the amount of food that people ate in 3 weeks is astounding. Um, I should have brought the list of it. It would really make you raise your eyebrows. It's quite an amazing amount of food and beer, to say the least. It's Philadelphia. They were bringing lots of beer. So that's basically what it looked like. So it covered 200,000 square feet. It was built in 40 days' time. So next slide, please. Now we're back to the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore Depot, because again, that is where Lincoln and his cabinet arrived on June the 16th. They brought their wives with them as well. So it was a big family affair, if you will. Next slide, please. Okay. Pennsylvania Railroad. Again, it was mentioned like 33rd and Market at that point in time. Down here is Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore. That's Washington. That's Broad and Prime. So 2 is the Continental Hotel, and then 3 is Independence Hall, and in the upper right-hand corner again is the Philadelphia and Trenton Railroad Depot at 8th and Berks. And of course, that would later become part of the Reading Railroad after the centennial. So that's everybody got in and out of the city at that point in time. So Jen, next slide, please. We're back to the Continental Hotel. We've seen this. Another slide, please, Jen. The Union League. This was the old Hartman Kuhn mansion. Hartman Kuhn they were an old German family, multiple generations in Philadelphia at the time of the Civil War. Hartman Kuhn was considered the best cricketer in the country at that point in time, but was living someplace else. So this is 1118 Chestnut Street. And you can again see how and there really was an eagle put up top, the flag flying. But I still have a hard time imagining the ladies of the League leaning out the windows, waving their handkerchiefs, and the men, lustily applauding whatever the heck they were doing. To me, it just like dirty old men. What the hell? But anyway, it's a fun image to have nonetheless. So, Jen, the next slide, please. So this is Sidney George Fisher, and one of Philadelphia's great characters of the 19th century. Its greatest diarist. If you were to read one book about Philadelphia in the 19th century, I would really recommend this one, because his diary goes from 1837 until his death in 1872. And it is full of fun gossip, but lots of really good historical history and facts. Personalities, people we never hear of otherwise because they weren't famous enough to make the history books in Philadelphia, but who nonetheless contributed a lot to it. Fishers were an old Quaker family, as were the Georges. So he was originally Quaker, although he eventually became an Episcopalian, as so many Quakers did in the 19th century. A complex man, but an incredibly bright, smart, and brilliant man. He actually wrote a number of pamphlets for the Union League, since they published over 2 million pamphlets during the course of the war itself, but never joined the League. And ironically, he was married to Elizabeth Ingersoll, and the Ingersolls were without doubt the most rabidly pro-Confederate, pro-slavery family in Philadelphia. Charles Jared, who was the son of Jared. Jared was a member of the Continental Congresses in 74 and 75. Charles Jared, though, became and who knows why, but he just decided that the South was the future of the country. And his 2 sons, Edward and Charles, were the 2 most vilified or hated members of that family during the Civil War. And yet he was married to their sister. And so part of the give and take in his diary is just what goes on between the Ingersoll family and Sidney Fisher himself. And it's wonderful to read. There's nothing else quite like it. So yes, Virginia, there was a 19th century in Philadelphia, and this man had a lot to do with it. So next slide, please. Now we're back to this again. Move on, please, Jen. And this is a watercolor of the Hartman Kuhn mansion. Looks very different. And if we haven't really talked about it a lot, but Philadelphia was not the pro-union, pro-city you thought it could, should, or would have been at the time of the Civil War itself. It was pretty well divided down the middle. But you can see the front steps here. And George Boker was one of the two founders of the Union League. And one day he was walking up the front steps when a man walked up, pulled up behind him, put a pistol behind his head, and fired. Luckily, it didn't shoot. So why would you assassinate someone like George Boker? There really wasn't any need to do that. I mean, but that's how hot-tempered feelings were running in the 19th century in Philadelphia during the Civil War itself, that they were trying to assassinate a member of the Union League of Philadelphia. Crazy stuff. So next slide, please, Jen. This is Daniel Doherty. So, and as you can tell, he doesn't sound like he would belong to a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant conservative Republican men's club, which it really didn't become till the end of the 19th century, but Doherty was the city's leading Irish Catholic citizen, great orator, lawyer, and a Democrat. And at the foundational meeting of the Union League on December 27th of 1862, when they were reading what they called the Articles of Association, they read the words Republican Club. And at that point, Doherty jumped out of his seat. Not for me, not for me. I'm not for any Republican president. I'm for my country. And with that, all hell broke loose, apparently. And John Innes Clark Hare, the other founder, who was one of the city's leading jurists in the 19th century, calmed the waters and made people understand that if this was going to be a political organization, it wasn't going to work. They needed Democrats, they needed Republicans, they needed people who wanted to save the Union, first and foremost. And so Doherty's interruption, if you will, carried the day, and they cut the words out of the Articles of Association, which we still have to this day in the archival collection. So kind of neat to see. So that's Daniel Doherty, and he's buried alongside St. John's Church on South 13th Street. There's a little tiny graveyard along the side there. That's where he's buried in there. So next slide, please, Jen. 1865. So here you go. In less than 2 seconds, that's all it took. So, and for what it's worth, well, there's Mary Todd Lincoln to Lincoln's right, and to the right of that was Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée, Cecilia Harris. The Grants were supposed to be there in that booth that night, but Mrs. Grant despised Mrs. Lincoln, as did most people in Washington, D.C. She had a hard time making friends. And so the only people they could find was the major and his fiancée. Rathbone jumped up and tried to stop Booth, but couldn't. And instead, he was stabbed, because Booth also carried a knife, which people don't really understand. They just think it's it's a one-shot Derringer pistol made here in Philadelphia, by the way. So there's irony in that. So Booth stabbed Rathbone, who would eventually collapse from loss of blood. After the war, and to show you how things can linger, Rathbone joined the diplomatic corps after the war, and he was stationed and he married his fiancée. They got married. They had 3 little girls. He was stationed in Germany in, I think it was 1884, when he went into a major depression because he had blamed himself for not ever stopping Booth from killing Abraham Lincoln. He killed his 3 daughters and tried to shoot his wife, and did not succeed at that. And at that point, he was committed to an insane asylum, where he died a few years later in Germany. So he, if you will, was the last victim of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So next slide, please. So here we have Lincoln's funeral train. Really quite something to see. I think, judging by the amount of gray hair in this room, or even lack of gray hair and just lack of hair in this room, I think I know that I have vivid memories of watching, the Kennedy funeral trains, plural. I mean, it's the way we did it back then. So next slide, please. Oh. Lincoln's, yes. So yes, the question was, did they rebuild Lincoln's funeral car? And the answer is yes, they did. At one point, oh geez, I forget which anniversary it was for. They were actually trying to rebuild the whole train, that is from the engine to the cars and everything else. And they were going to run them on the old route that his inauguration train took, and then on this funeral train on the way back. But they just never were able to raise the money for it. Although I think they built the engine in one of the cars, and there's a steam line in central PA, south of Harrisburg. It's not Strasburg, but it's not too far from there anyway. But they actually run on some of the original tracks that were used by Lincoln's train when it came into Gettysburg for November the 19th, when he gave the Gettysburg Address. anyway, that's the funeral car right there. So, all right, next slide, please, Jen. So this is the stop in Harrisburg. So again, Baltimore, Harrisburg, and Philadelphia. The body did not lay and stayed in the state capitol, but rather they kept it in the car itself, and people were allowed to walk through the car. That's how they got to see the coffin. And as you can imagine, it was a 2-week trip. And so every time it stopped for the body to be viewed or on display in some way, shape, or form, they had a mortician come in and repowder the face and things like that, because it did turn black eventually from gangrene and things like that. So I can only imagine what that must have been like. So next slide, please, Jen. So in the League's archival collection is the Pennsylvania Railroad schedule for the train itself. So you can see Harrisburg, High Spire, which still exists, Middletown still exists, Conewago siding. I don't know about that. Coon siding, I don't know. Mount Joy still exists. Landisville, yep. Kaufman's siding, I think, is not there anymore, but next, please. But up top, Lancaster, Birdenham, Gordonville. Okay, Lehman Place is actually where the line connects to the Strasburg Railroad. Kenner's Gap is there. Christiana is there. Parksburg is there. Amtrak stops there. Coatesville, Downingtown. Geez, what else? Westchester, Paoli. Eagle was Bryn Mawr. Morgan's Corner, I think, was Ardmore. Whitehall, might have been City Avenue, and then West Philadelphia, and then the Baltimore Depot. So, and that's it. And it was on time. You can see it says 4:30, and that's what time the train arrived at the Baltimore Depot. So, next slide, please. Back to that again. Move on, please, Jen. All right. So this is a letter on Union League House Stationery, Philadelphia, April 21st, 1865. Sir, the Committee of the Select and Common Councils of Philadelphia, having countered upon the Union League the honor of receiving the body of the late President of the United States on its arrival in Independence Square, you are requested to meet your fellow members at Concert Hall at an hour to be hereafter announced for the purpose of assisting at that ceremony. It is the earnest desire of the board that every member of the League wearing his badge shall be present on this occasion. George H. Boker, Secretary. So the League had that honor, as we've heard about. So next slide. Oh, got it. Yep, we're almost done. That's the funeral car, or the hearse, if you will. Next slide, please. And here we have the funeral car itself, and you can see it's on tasker between 4th and 5th. There is no coffin on it yet, but you can see the horse. So this fellow here who drove the funeral car is named Alfred LaRue. After he was finished with these, he actually gave the Union League parts of the reins to that team of horses. So we have them they were in the collection. So kind of neat to see. Next slide, please. Here we have the casket on the funeral car, and there's Alfred LaRue. So next slide, please. And this is an actual mourning badge or funeral badge that was worn by a member who ironically was named John Brown. I've always liked that one. So we have a few of them in the collection itself. You can see how simple they are. All right. Next slide, please. And the apotheosis, Abraham Lincoln rising to heaven to be with George Washington. So that does it, folks. So thank you all very much. I'm really impressed nobody fell asleep. Thanks. No, not that I've ever come across.
So 1861, the city is really divided. The president-elect comes, 100,000 people greet him. Were there counter demonstrators? Was there anything against him at that point?
No. And ironically, and this is what's kind of interesting about Philadelphia's political history. I mean, in 1856, when there were 3 candidates running, a Democrat, a nativist, and a Republican, the Democrat and the nativist got 89% of the vote in Philadelphia. So, I mean, so the two parties that are, anti-slavery, anti-black, anti-Catholic, anti-Jewish, anti-immigrant, get 89% of the vote. And Fremont, who won 33% of the vote as a Republican candidate nationally, got only 11% in Philadelphia. So that gives you some idea of the political balance right now in the city. 1860, in a four candidate race, Abraham Lincoln gets 52% of the vote in the city. So obviously, Philadelphia, something happened in the city in those 4 years. I mean, Buchanan's presidency was not the best in American history, to say the least. So but a lot of the issues were coming to the fore, both pro and con. And at that point, I think the city was definitely moving towards Abraham Lincoln. But as as we know, in counteraction to the founding of the League, the City Democratic Committee created its own club, literally across the street on Walnut Street from the Independence Hall. And Charles Ingersoll was the president. And I didn't bring that material with me tonight, but if you took my Civil War tour, whenever actually it was February a year ago, just hearing the vitriol in Ingersoll's preamble, like this country was made for white people, and it is in their power and their interest that this country be maintained for white people, and that they have the right to basically dissemble their government at any time they choose or wish to do. I mean, it was just absolutely an amazing preamble. So there was always this very, I think, tenuous balance between North and South in the city. So yes.
So, question from Zoom. Charlie Kruger wants to know, given the thousands of people viewing Lincoln's corpse, why do no photographs exist? I have a theory, but I want to hear yours.
Thank you. They're right. So Edwin McMaster Stanton, who was Lincoln's Secretary of War and his most trusted cabinet member. I mean, without Stanton, it's hard to think that the war would have ended as well as it did, so to speak. Stanton forbade any photographs of the body when it was on display in any city. Yep, absolutely. And he also just thought that it just wasn't necessary. I mean, the country had been through enough at that point, so no need to do it. However, a photographer snuck into City Hall in New York City and did take a photograph that looks down on Lincoln. And it's a glass plate, and it survived. There was a crack going through it, but it wasn't found until, I think, around 1964. It was found in an archival collection somewhere. So copies have been made of that, but it is the only image we have of Abraham Lincoln's body lying in state anywhere between Washington and Springfield. So, all right.
I think the first Republican convention took place in Philadelphia, right? 1856.
Right.
Was Lincoln a Republican at that point? Did he not get an invitation to go to this, or I can't remember if that was the case.
At that point, Lincoln was not a candidate. He had two very successful years as a House of Representative member from Illinois. I mean, his political star had really waned by the mid '50s.
They called him Spotty Lincoln because he was only there for like 2 terms.
Well, then there was also the spot resolution,
Right.
From the Mexican-American War that he was against, and stuff like that. So, but yeah, no, and he was kind of the dark horse even in 1860. I mean, people didn't really. I mean, he was not a nationally known figure at that point in time, but he became the kind of a choice. So.
What was Lincoln's primary religion?
He attended a Presbyterian church in Washington on occasion, but he was not a deeply religious man in that he went to services on Sundays, but he had a strong faith and a belief in God. And so in all of his writings and all of his speeches, he's always referencing God himself, but not in the reference of any specific religion, if you will, like Presbyterianism or Catholicism or Episcopalianism and stuff like that. And surprisingly, it was the Methodist bishop from Philadelphia, Simpson, who actually gave the eulogy in Washington, D.C., of all things. So here he had a Methodist minister versus a Presbyterian minister. So, like I say, Lincoln didn't belong to any specific denomination that I'm aware of, that I remember. There's a wonderful book written by Alan Galzo called Abraham Lincoln, Redeemer President, which really goes into much greater depth than I could possibly. I forget a lot of what I read in the book. So, but it's probably the best book about Lincoln and his religion that's ever been written. And it's been revised, so you can probably find on Amazon for like $5. If not, I'll lend you a copy. He did not. No. Oh, I'm sorry. So, unlike modern day presidents, did Lincoln have a religious advisor? And no, he did not. No, no, he wasn't. There wasn't any far right nationalism at that point in time, or Christian nationalism. Yeah.
I have a little bit to add for the
Sure.
church. I do DC tours. That's nicknamed the President Church because it's like right behind or on the north side. But that church tells the story that Abe Lincoln would go there not so much for services, but to like have a moment left alone.
Hmm.
Like he would sit in the back and just to be left alone. And like people kind of assumed he was going for prayer, but they kind of say like he was never seen as visibly praying, but it was maybe he was finding some private time and the stress of everyone wanting
Sure.
to speak to him. So
Yep. Is that St. John the Evangelist? Lafayette Square? Yeah. And that's the one where where Trump did his. Yep. No. Oh, sure. You bet. Absolutely. All right. Oh, yep. Can we do?
How did one become a member of the Union League, and how many of them were there at that point?
You were asked to join, which is still the way it works to this day. By the end of 1863, there were 1,000 members, which means that they really had kind of the right idea at the right time. That's pretty amazing. That's an amazing size for any city club. But again, they were more of a patriotic society. I mean, they called themselves a patriotic social society, is what, is how they describe themselves. By the end of the war, there were 1,500 members. And then after that, depending on the economy, it would, and what's going on in the world of politics, the membership would go up and down over the years. And it's still, although I've got to admit, since the turn of the 21st century, it's been on an upward spiral ever since. It's been amazing to see. It really has. So, but that's so again, you're asked. Although if you know a member and you're interested, I'm sure that you could just kind of whisper in their ear and say, "Hey, what does it take?" Or you can go to the membership department and they'll talk. Like 10 years ago, they wouldn't have taken your phone call. Today, I think they will. So give them a call. Yeah. No worries. All right. I think we're at an end. Okay.
Thank you, Jim. Marianne could not be here tonight. As you may know, she's attending to her father who's ill. She's up in Scranton. Although she is continuing to work very hard on the behalf of all the membership, she connected with Jim just early this afternoon. Moment's notice, Jim stepped up to fill a temporary void. I do have a few announcements about our speakers. Before I do that, I want to remind everybody, we do have a form. If you could print your name on the form's over here on this table. It's about 10 people or so that have yet to sign in or print in. So if you haven't done that, please find our form. Next month, we'll be back at Hips Place, the Philly Gourmet, 114 Market Street. And our speaker will be Cynthia Jansen on the topic of Dolly Madison, a political influencer. Our own Jim Murphy made that suggestion. She has been an interpreter. She worked with the APT years ago when Ed Major was with us on, especially on for Sally, right, Jim? Did I get that story right? So Jim made those arrangements, and we look forward to hearing from Cynthia. Though she is an interpreter, she won't be here as Dolly. She'll be here as Cynthia, speaking about Dolly. This evening's planned speaker is Kelly Racine Barnes, a PhD. Her topic is The Invisible Architects of Freedom. It's a digital archive, a database of primary sources related to the development of the Black American community in early Philadelphia. The project is a part of the Park Service. She will come back here in May, and we'll let you know where we'll be. We may be back here at Christ Church for that particular meeting. She has a special tie here to this place. We do have several events coming up. Many of you have responded to the question, or rather they ask for help on committees. We appreciate that. So there's a lot of committees that are busy. If you're a part of one, or you want to be a part of one, or if you want to help out in any other way, just send Mary Ann an email. We do have a program that we are developing for mentorship. It is a new mentorship program. It's one that's been talked about for several years. So if you are either an experienced guide, or if you want someone to help you in this business of tour guiding, again, let Mary Ann know. She's putting that program together. We do have coming up soon on February 18th. It's the third Tuesday of the month, the tour guide coffee break, which is always at the back of the IVC at 10 a.m. And if you let the IVC know that you are an APT member, you can get 10% off your coffee. Did they want to see our badge or something, Jim? Okay, you do need to have your APT membership card with you, or your lanyard. Coming up the end of the month on February 28th, which is a Friday at 11:30 a.m., Judith Robinson of North to the World, also an APT member, she's put together a trip, a complimentary tour of the Charles Blockson Afro-American Collection. It's one of the most prestigious collections of African-American artifacts in the United States. That collection houses over 500,000 items relating to the global Black experience, and has an extensive catalog dating from 1581 to the present. So we'll be taking reservations for that tour. Just drop me an email, vicepresident@phillyguides.org. Preferably put the word Blockson Collection in the subject. And this is a complimentary tour. Again, Friday the 28th at 11:30. All are welcome. Mary Ann has scheduled a certification exam on March 8th at 9 a.m. That'll also be at Hip's Place, which is the Philly Gourmet Steaks. You need to register by Thursday, March 6th to take the exam on Saturday, March 8th. You pay through the APT store. If you previously paid and for some reason didn't take the exam, or that wasn't your best day and you need another try, you do not have to pay twice to take the exam. You can take it as often as you like. One price fits all. Our book club is coming up on our next book club is March 18th at 7 p.m. And it's in honor of both Black History and Women's History Months. It'll be by Zoom. The selection for March is Never Caught: The Washington's Relentless Pursuit of Their Runaway Slave, One Judge. The book is by Erica Armstrong. And that is certainly a topic to feature at the President's House for many tours. So we thank Pam for putting that together for our book club. And let's make that a really, really well-attended book club. How many people typically are there? 4 or 5. So there's 31 here today. How many are on the Zoom? 18. So we have 50 people just about, if my math's somewhat close. So it's only 10%. So if we could maybe double that for the month of March. And Pam has told us before, we do not actually have to read the book, right?
Hi, everybody. No, the book club is, even if you want to just learn and hear about the book, and of course, we're tour guides, so we wind up discussing all kinds of things related to the book, all things historical. You don't have to give a report. Maybe you just want to listen to the discussion, get an idea, and then go out and get the book or not. So please don't think you have to read the book to zoom into the book club. While I'm up here, I just sent in a form for the newsletter And there's still a little bit of confusion on the dates. So either March 19th or 20th, and I'll get back to the Mutter about this. We are going to have a guided tour of the Mutter Museum as a field trip for our ongoing Early Philadelphia Medica program. The cost to members will be $12 for the admission. You need to have that money in no later than March 12th. They require their payment 7 days in advance. I will continue putting this in the newsletter up until the date of the trip. I just want to let you know that we've got a preliminary plan in place for this. I'm also trying to get it to sync with the opening of their new exhibit. They're just taking down the previous exhibit as I speak. So look for more items and more specifics in the newsletter about the Mutter Museum tour.
Thank you, Pam. We also have a tour coming up on Sunday, March 23rd at 10 a.m. It'll be about an hour and a half, and it is of the USS New Jersey. The cost will also be $12 per person, and you'll see more news on both of those upcoming field trips in future newsletters, so please pay attention. We have had in the past several events where there's been a charge. Could be anywhere as little as $5, sometimes as high as $25. If you're receptive to more of those, please let me know. The only thing we have to go by is if there's not many people coming to an event that charges a fee. We do have a budget, and the APT has subsidized some of these trips in the past. We've had some that have a small fee that the APT pays for. But if you're open to paying a fee such as $12, please let me know. Otherwise, we may be a little bit shy about planning for some of these events because they have a fee associated with them and they're often not well attended. So please just let me know. Whenever it's convenient for you, drop me an email, call, or open the window and yell like Rocky did, whatever is your preference. We do have corporate members that have several announcements. They were in today's newsletter. If you haven't read them, please go back and do so. One of them is Glory Day. They've been a corporate member now for several years. Jim is a member there. He's very active. And they put together a special night tomorrow night. They're having George Leone, who's a friend of the APT. He was here last year in May. He's the president of Homecoming 250, which is planning a massive celebration for the Navy and Marine Corps 250th anniversary coming up this October. It's a coordinated about 2 weeks of time. You know, the Navy's birthday is October 13th. The Marines is November 10th. So their program is somewhere in there. If you can go tomorrow night, 7 p.m., go to Glory Day. Parking is free there. It's a nice bonus. Yeah, if you can get there. It's only $10 and you get a piece of cake, right? Something to drink afterwards. You get to hang out, meet George. He himself is really a historian of the Navy's founding and the Marines. APT is continuing to work to help you tour guides and the professional tour guide companies research and put together your own tours so that you can serve the needs of the visitors. They're expecting several 100,000 visitors. And as we've mentioned before, we're going to link our webpage to their planning webpage. Marianne put that in today's email. So there's a form to fill out. If you have a tour that you want someone that's coming to know about, all you need to do is fill out that form very briefly so that she could put that on our website and they'll be able to connect directly to you or your company that you work for. In addition to that, we do want to hold at least one, if not more, special VIP tours for the Navy and Marines. If anybody's interested in doing that, I'm working on that project along with Jim, who has already provided one tour for them. So we know the extensive military history here in Philadelphia. We could talk about that all night. Carpenter's Hall has a Tuesday tea going on in the month of February. starting the 18th, and then the 25th. It's at 3:30, and there is a Dolly Madison interpreter. The cost is now $50. And speaking of Carpenters Hall, they will be closed this Friday, February 14th. I'm assuming they're closing because of the anticipated Valentine's Day crowd that's coming here Friday. Is that true?
Yeah.
Speaking of which, in 1866, the Union League hosted a Valentine's Day ball for war widows. Were you aware of that one, Jim? No, no, Jim wasn't there. But this is a really big celebration coming up Friday. Has anybody been here the last time, or anybody go to the parade the last time? I know it's a big topic. No. I've heard 1 million people are supposed to come this time. Is that true? That'll be quite interesting to see. You coming? No, no. Yeah. Speaking for those outside the city that come in often by train, that's a real challenge because there was some stories about the trains literally having not even standing room only last time, like all day long. So it's a challenge, but it's really a happy time here in Philadelphia, and we're all proud of the Philadelphia Eagles. Amongst the other members, we have Alfred's Alley that has the Alley Book Club coming up soon on February 23rd. Christ Church has several announcements in our newsletter, including one, there's an organ recital on February 23rd at 5 p.m. Everybody's invited to that. It's going to be the music of some guy named Bach. Also, there is a program on February 27th at 5 p.m. at the new Man Full of Trouble, or I should say the old Man Full of Trouble Tavern that's recently renovated. It's a free gathering where history and hops come together. Christ Church Preservation Trust has put that together for February the 27th. You've been there already? Yeah. 5 p.m. 5 p.m. Christ Church is working on an exhibit here in the neighborhood house. What it meant to the community then and now, the neighborhood house. And we certainly want to be supportive of that. So that's a detailed message that's in this week's newsletter. You'll want to read that. You can reach out to the Christ Church archivist, Carol Smith. Many of us know her. She's an archivist in several Philly institutions, looking for stories, photos, anything that you can share. So we want the APT, our membership, to talk about these things. Christ Church is a very warm place, very welcoming to the community, and certainly has been reaching out to us as an organization. So we want to do all we can to support them and their work, especially the work they do supporting the community. We're really proud to be here. Brian was here. He stepped out. I know, Laurel, you're a part of Christ Church. Tish, you're a part of Christ Church here. Bob, that's right, from Christ Church burial grounds. Yes, yes, where there are many stories to share. This is one of the oldest places. We had talk about 19th century Philadelphia. This really goes back to 17th century Philadelphia. So it's quite a remarkable place that stood here for a long time. We're very happy to be a part of it. There's 50 of us here tonight, almost. I'm curious to know how many people, show of hands, are like Jim, that we're connected. We either work at or volunteer at a museum or a historical institution. How many of us do that? And on Zoom, did anybody raise their hand on Zoom? Are you able to check that? I'm sure you are too, Dan, right? Just about. That's just about everybody. It looks like there's at least 35 or 40 of us that are connected one way or the other, or we're working or volunteering at an institution like this. It's really a big part of our work. And in Philadelphia here, we could have stories like we had tonight for hours on end. We have a really busy speaker program this year. We have not booked the entire year. We do have a template for the topics we'd like. For example, on the subject of art, we'd like a speaker, and on the subject of science, last year we had Philly's medical history. We had a speaker on the medical history on the subject of science. So those are just two that we have that are open. We do have a couple of open meetings. We do have speakers lined up here for March, April, now May, and already in July on the topic of independence. So if you have an idea or a suggestion for a speaker, feel free. And there's always the chance that we may need to pull somebody in last minute. Jim and Mary Ann were actually talking about this not too long ago, the possibility of doing this. And Jim told Mary Ann that today was Abraham Lincoln's birthday. So when this topic came up of what do we do now, that's the first thing that popped in her mind. So be persistent if you have an idea. Is there any other related topics we have to talk about? Jim, go ahead. New members. We have new members that we haven't met before. Sir, want to give the microphone? Why don't you come up to the microphone? Welcome, Ed.
Thank you. And I'll walk over here to say, Ed Budinger, thrilled to be exploring this idea of becoming a tour guide here in Philadelphia, and looking forward to taking that first exam.
Oh, great. Jim.
Two quick things for tour guides. The South Street Head House District has asked me if I would consider trying to pull together a tour of South Street. I'm not sure that that's a real viable topic, but I wanted to throw it out to the group. If we don't have first of all, at least for where I start, I like to do things starting at the IVC. South Street is a good walk away from there. But if any of you are interested in developing a tour for South Street, do me a favor, let me know. Elaine Ingersoll at South Street Head House is the one who asked me about it. My suggestion was going to be to talk to the people at the Black Journey about the 7th Ward tour. But if any of you are interested, do me a favor, email me at murfman1@comcast.net, and I'll hook you up with her and we'll see where we go. The other thing is that I've been doing tours for a company called Go West Tours for about 4 years. Patrick Couet, who is I think he's a former member who's now in California, asked me to take over when he had COVID. I've been doing those tours and they've come back just lately with a bunch of other tours. I'm now 80 years old and I don't like to do back-to-back days because I get too tired. They've got a couple tours of English people and Australians coming in this year. If any of you are interested in considering those tours, do me a favor again, email me. They pay $300 for a 4-hour city tour. They've been real good to work with. The only thing they will do is they will ask you for your bank account. They'll deposit the money directly into your account. That when I first was asked to do that, I was a little bit suspicious, but it's worked out well for 4 years. But anyway, those are two opportunities for tour guides. If you're interested, let me know.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Jim Mundy and I were speaking about the builder of the Union League. He is a Carpenter Company member by the name of John Crump. You may not have heard of him, but he came to mind in my mind when I was listening to Jim today. Jim Crump was the construction manager. He also built one of the Chestnut Street theaters, the third version of the Chestnut Street Theater, and some hotels, some that are still standing in Philadelphia. He built 2 of them that were near the Centennial Celebration exhibit, that part of Philadelphia. John Crump. I know about him because I like to read the works of Carl Karsh, one of Carpenter Company's past historians. And just this week, the present day historian, John Moss, passed away. Some of you may have met John Moss over the years. He's worked with the Athenaeum, prolific author, historian, and involved in preservation of historic buildings, John Moss. So we all mourn his passing. Thank you all for coming tonight. That's all we have. We look forward to next month. We are back at Hips Place on the second Wednesday in the month of March. See you all then, if not before.